Hey everybody! In preparation for this chapter of Nerd Hack, I had a little chat with my good friend Tony Stark's regional assistant, and I scored myself a brand new power armor suit. Well, it's not all that new. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's a discarded prototype, but hey, it's not without its charm. It's glitchy, stinky, probably was never washed out charm. Whew. But still, even with that Stark funk, this thing is awesome. Sort of. Alright, not so awesome. To be honest, I've always wanted a power armor suit, but now that I have one, it's kind of clunky, cumbersome, and way too confining. I kind of wish I had built something of my own instead of swiping someone else's IP and trying to shoehorn myself into it. I wonder if there's an analogy hidden in that. Nah. In 1997, the movie Starship Troopers was released in the theaters. This was an important day for me as I had been a fan of the novel since I first read it. I was very eager, and foolishly so, to see what Hollywood would do with a work I considered influential in my formative years following high school. Before I get into my thoughts on the film, let me explain my connection with the source material. You see, directly after graduating from Western New York Citizen Indoctrination Program, otherwise known as high school, I joined the military, a rather strange choice for someone with my nerdish interests, but there I was. Okay, fine. Right. So, as I was saying, there I was. A military nerd repairing helicopter engines all around the world. What a job. Now, before I was shipped off to basic training in lovely, picturesque Fort Dix, New Jersey, I read a novel called Starship Troopers. Being I was really into sci-fi and an avid Battletech player at the time, it seemed right up my alley, particularly given the cover art. I have to say, I wasn't quite prepared for what was within those pages. The novel was originally published in 1959, and Robert A. Heinlein packed it with a lot of his views on how he felt the military and society should work. For its time, it was quite controversial, proposing such shocking concepts as an all-volunteer military and officers that were separated by staff and combat roles. No co-ed showers were not one of his innovations, but we will get to that later. This caused quite a stir. Even if today what was once deemed radical now seems rather mild or even has been adopted by our armed services. In fact, for years, Starship Troopers was required reading in the U.S. Army leadership courses. For me, it was not some of his more severe concepts as parents sharing in the punishments of their children's criminal offenses, or even the military having AWOL soldiers who committed crimes returned to the military for punishment. That caught me a bit off guard. It was, in my opinion at the time, the harsh nature of the military training and the severe consequences even minor infractions brought that seemed over the top to me. I had so much to learn. To give you an example, I have to explain that in the novel, Juan Johnny Rico, the main character, enlists in the mobile infantry. This branch of the infantry is given this title because they are universally outfitted with power armor, wrapping them in protective steel while arming them to the teeth with everything up to and including tactical nukes. They are also outfitted with jump jets, allowing them to bounce high into the air, allowing the grunts incredible range and mobility. I have to admit, I love the idea of this, and despite my intro, would relish the chance to have a set of this armor. Of course, considering that I would probably make more than my fair share of mistakes, crashing into a few structures before I got the hang of it, my neighbors surely sleep better at night knowing I don't have a Marauder suit. Oh well, a small price to pay for neighborhood tranquility, I guess. Anyways, Johnny is going through a training exercise in his power armor, and in order to achieve the mission's goals quickly, he targets the mock enemy and sends off a simulated nuke, then bounds happily away only to have his suit suddenly shut off. That wonderful armor he is wearing goes from being light as a feather to a 2-ton coffin in the blink of an eye. As he sits, a prisoner trapped within the confining chunk of tech, his instructor calmly walks up and explains to him that, had Johnny checked his radar before launching his little attack, he would have noticed that some of his squad mates were in the blast radius of his nuke. Furthermore, had his weapon been real, those same squad mates would now be dead. For this simulated infraction, Johnny is treated to a very real, very brutal public caning. How barbaric! Such harsh punishment for such a minor crime. I mean, it was all simulated. No one was actually hurt, right? Why such a draconian response? Well, that's what I thought at the time. Now let's flash forward to little old nerd me struggling through basic in wonderful old Fort Dix, New Jersey. My real-life scenario was nowhere nearly as dramatic. There were no nukes or even any power armor. Just Private Mangold patiently standing in line for breakfast chow. Alright, there was nothing patient about it. I was starving, as I was through 90% of basic training, and I wanted food. Now! As I waited in line, trying not to drool on my empty tray, a private on KP duty walked out of the kitchen carrying a heavy load of drinking glasses. He really wasn't paying attention to what he was doing and, with an ill-placed foot, slipped and dropped the entire rack, shattering glass all over the floor. The sergeant in charge of KP was livid, screaming at the clumsy private at the top of his lungs, and for a moment, just a moment, my heart went out to the poor guy. He clearly felt bad about what he had done, and the sergeant was just making things worse. Why did he have to browbeat the poor kid so much? Then I thought back to the Starship Troopers novel. The reality of the situation was, the private wasn't going to be running KP his whole military career, theoretically. He was there for basic, just like me, and would soon be off to his advanced training, followed swiftly by assignment to a permanent unit. What if he was in artillery, and that rack he had been carrying wasn't full of glasses, but artillery rounds? That same level of carelessness wouldn't have resulted in a few minutes of yelling, a few hundred push-ups, and a lot of sweeping up. He would be dead, and so would anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. If the tongue lashing he got at that moment convinced him to think a bit more when carrying critical cargo, might that save his life? Maybe a few other lives as well? That thought not only changed how I viewed his punishment, but altered my view of a few punishments I received as well. There were many more instances throughout the book that echoed in my personal journey through the military, but I will not bore you with the details, until a later video perhaps. Suffice to say, when I reread the novel after leaving the service, my views had completely changed. Some punishments still seemed severe, and I doubt I would complete the training Johnny survived. But so much now made perfect sense as I was viewing the novel from the perspective of one who lived a shadow life, albeit pale in comparison, to the larger-than-life adventures of Johnny Rico. Now let's flash forward to the movie released in 1997. I won't get into the sequels. The first movie was enough for me. I went in with a bit of trepidation, as the trailers already had me concerned. First off was the inclusion of Michael Ironside in the cast. Don't get me wrong, I love a lot of the man's work, but I learned long before that certain actors appear in certain types of movies, and Ironside was in a lot of cheesy action flicks in the 80s and 90s. This concern was only compounded by the style of the movie trailers, with lots of loud contemporary rock, speaking of mindless action flick completely alien to the source material. I was wrong in some of these assumptions, but not in the way I'd hoped. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that love this movie. My wife is one of them. I'm not telling you not to like it, although you really shouldn't. I'm just saying that I cannot stand it. This is not due to the acting, as I know all involved gave their best. I really have to hand it to Neil Patrick Harris on this, as I had only seen him as Doogie Howser before this, and he gave a great performance here. But this movie was the complete antithesis of everything the novel stood for, with the movie's surreal depiction of military propaganda, the over-the-top combat stunts, and the upending of every theme Robert A. Heinlein had crafted into his novel. It was no surprise to me when I learned that the film director Paul Verhoeven admitted he never actually read the novel. He simply scanned the first chapters, declared it boring, and threw it in the trash. Now, I could try to go through the movie and discuss how each scene and character arc deviates from the novel, like the fact that Dizzy was a male in the book and dies in combat right at the beginning of the story. But I don't see the point. To be honest, there just aren't enough scenes to compare between the two. The movie really is its own thing, which makes me wish they had just given it a different title. But I do feel there is one scene that the novel and movie share that illustrates how divorced this film is from its literary roots. It is early in the film, so no spoilers here for anyone who hasn't seen it. Although that was 25 years ago. Come on, really? Johnny, Carmen, and Carl are visiting a military recruiter looking to sign up. The build-up to this is very similar between the two, so no need to go into details there. But the difference in the conversations and the fallout afterwards really shows the contrast in visions. Let's start with the movie. We have met each of the trio, gotten a vague feel for their relationships, and their individual strengths and weaknesses, particularly Johnny's weakness in math. As they go bouncing up to the recruiter, the feeling is one of youthful excitement and misguided enthusiasm, particularly for Johnny. When asked how they did on their placement test, Carmen reveals she is slotted to be a pilot, earning a hearty congratulations. Carl has made military intelligence, the recruiter remarks he will probably be saluting Carl, and Johnny replies, infantry. The recruiter responds happily to Johnny's announcement, shaking his hand via his prosthetic limb, revealing his amputated legs, all while announcing that the infantry made him the man he is today. Johnny's reaction says it all. We are to see this exchange as an ironic statement on the meat grinder that is the military, something the movie will back up with every single scene that follows. You could say that this scene is actually the theme stated for the movie, along with the propaganda commercials. Watch the 1997 film if you would like to learn more. Now, the same scene exists in the book with all the same characters and many of the same lines, but the theme is drastically different. First of all, we see the recruiter's horrific deformities the moment our trio arrives because he showcases them. This is a touch of foreshadowing in of itself, but not in the way you might think. As in the movie, Carmen announces she wishes to be a pilot. The recruiter is every bit as enthusiastic, echoing the line about needing women of her caliber. However, when Johnny announces he also wishes to be a pilot, the recruiter is brutally frank about his chances. 0. You see, in the novel's vision, only women are pilots, as only they have the minds and reflexes necessary for the complex tasks of piloting interstellar military craft. There will be no romantic triangle between Carmen, her fellow officer, and Johnny, and no co-ed infantry barracks or showers. Only biological men are allowed in the infantry. Make of that what you will. When Carmen is left to complete her testing, the recruiter turns on Johnny and Carl. He is brutally frank, laying out every dark scenario that will likely play out should they choose to join. He explains in no uncertain terms that, with the policies in place that anyone who wants to be a full citizen must serve a minimum enlistment, they are overflowing with recruits with too few jobs to give them. The fact of the matter is, he doesn't want Johnny or Carl to join and tries very hard to discourage them, making every effort to draw their attention to his disfiguring wounds. This is all for naught, as Johnny and Carl insist on signing up, so the recruiter does his job, filling out their paperwork and sending them on to testing. After their aptitude tests are complete, we learn Carl has been assigned to R&D. We never see this character again other than to learn of his offstage demise later in the novel. And Johnny has been assigned to the mobile infantry. As our hero leaves the offices for home, he runs into the recruiter once more, sans wheelchair. The retired military officer is now strolling across the lobby on 2 good legs, looking not the slightest bit wounded. When Johnny confronts him on this, the recruiter explains that he has perfectly functioning prosthetics but does not wear them on duty for the exact effect his appearance has. He wants to drive off as many recruits as possible and save them what will likely be an unfulfilling career that they probably won't have the guts to complete. When he learns of Johnny's assignment, he speaks a line about the mobile infantry making him the man he is today, but the effect is quite the opposite of the one in the movie. Theme stated once more, but with a completely different message. Worthy of note here is the fact that in the novel, Johnny goes on to become an officer, enrolling in higher level training. At this point, most of his military instructors are retired combat veterans sporting a full array of physical deformities that remove them from active service. This is not merely shown to illustrate the ravages of warfare and the price of service, but also to show the dedication of these soldiers. Despite their wounds, they refuse to leave the military behind, electing instead to continue service by training the next batch of soldiers in any capacity that they can. Consider this when watching the cinematic version. I could go on, tracking the novel's version of Johnny's life as he completes training the Spartans of old would have approved of, how Johnny learns why the military fights, how gaining rank gains one more headaches than privileges, and how camaraderie is earned through bloodshed and sacrifice. But frankly, I couldn't do it justice. The Starship Troopers novel does not glorify war, but neither does it seek to vilify the military. As we witness Johnny going from green recruit to a veteran commanding his own unit of apes, the nickname mobile infantry grunts give each other, we learn the author's views on the military, on society, and how he feels it should all work and why. It is a serious read about subjects near and dear to the author. Now, here's where I suppose I should say they should have made the movie just like the novel, locked into the strict narrative provided. However, I just can't. The fact of the matter is, as much as I love this book, no one could make a movie directly from it. Too much is dedicated to the author pontificating through his characters as to why their civilian law works the way it does, why the military ranks work the way they do, why the military fights the way it does, and why their world is so much better than the one they left behind. All these scenes are little more than info dumps, handled well, but impossible to transfer directly to the silver screen in any entertaining way. As much as I hate to admit it, on some level I agree with the director. Had the book been ported straight to the silver screen, it would have been dull, dull, dull. That said, I still hate this movie. No offense to those who love it. Although I know a direct copy of the source material would have been box office poison, I maintain that the director could have been more faithful to the source material. If he had pulled the lessons Johnny had learned and recast them in scenes where we are seeing these points playing out before our eyes, instead of having instructors relay them to Johnny, It might have made for a dark, gritty experience set against a fantastic science fiction backdrop. This was actually achieved to some degree by a computer animated series that shared the same source material called Roughnecks. Sadly, the series was never finished and the animation is quite dated by current standards, but if you want a telling of the story that is slightly more faithful to its roots, Roughnecks is worth a watch. It's also wife approved. So, there are my views on Starship Troopers in novel and movie form. Now, before I go, if you like fantasy stories with a bit of sci-fi flavor mixed in, why not check out my fantasy novel series, The Scrolls of Asbiel, starting with The Sorcerer's Inception, followed by A Manifold of Bindings, available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback formats. The third novel in the series, A Traitor's Path, is targeted for release fourth quarter next year. I would also like to mention a company I hold in high regard, not due to any compensation they give me, as I mentioned before I have no sponsors, but due to the outstanding products they produce. As an author and freelance industrial designer, I spend a lot of time at my computer sitting on my rump. As a result, having a good, comfortable chair is vital. I have tried many different brands, but after a standard work session, I would often end up with a rather sore tailbone and aching back. Since I received my Luxmaster Racer chair, those discomforts are things of the past. Reasonably priced and super easy to assemble, Luxmaster makes a great product. I've had mine for over a year now, and I would not go back to my old office chair. If you're in need of a gaming chair that provides great comfort, why not check out the Luxmaster website and see if they have a chair that's right for you. Please join me next time when I'll be discussing a different group of Space Marines caught up in a much more recent controversy and how all of that relates to my own fictional characters. So until the next time, please hit that like button, the subscribe button, and what other YouTube button that strikes your fancy. I would really appreciate it, and as ever, I will do my best to make it worth your while.